A billionaire walked into a Seattle cafe with 4 armed bodyguards, a signed check, and the kind of rage that comes from never being told no. He found a young CEO sitting alone with a laptop and a contract worth $500 million. He tore it in half. He shoved her into a chair, and every single person in that cafe looked down at their coffee. Every single person, except a mechanic in the back corner who hadn't thrown a punch in 3 years, and was about to remind everyone in that room why some men are built differently. If you've ever watched someone stand up when no one else would, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story like this one. Hit the like button if you believe quiet strength is the most dangerous kind, and drop a comment telling us what city and country you're watching from. We want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now settle in. This one takes 2 hours, and every minute earns it. The rain came down hard that Tuesday morning, the kind of Seattle rain that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives and makes everything feel heavier. Water ran off the awnings in thin silver curtains, and the sidewalks outside the Pike District had already emptied. Most people had ducked inside wherever they could find shelter. A few had given up on umbrellas entirely and were just walking fast with their shoulders hunched, letting the cold do whatever it wanted. Ryan Walker hadn't checked the weather before he left the house. He rarely did anymore. There was a time in his life when knowing the weather mattered, when it told him how far sound would carry or how long a body of water would take to cross, or what kind of footing to expect in the dark. Those days were behind him. Now it was just rain. He zipped his jacket a little higher and pushed open the door of Meridian Coffee. The cafe was small, maybe 15 tables, exposed brick on 2 walls, a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed its specials in 3 months. Ryan came here every Tuesday before school pickup because the coffee was strong and nobody bothered him, and the booth in the back corner had a view of both the front door and the side exit, which was a habit he had never managed to break. He ordered a black coffee, declined the loyalty card for the 4th time, and carried his cup to the back without looking at anyone in particular, which was how he always entered a room, seeing everything and appearing to see nothing. He pulled out his phone and stared at a text from Emma's teacher. His daughter had forgotten her rain jacket again. He typed back a reply. "I'll bring it when I pick her up at 3, and set the phone face down on the table. Emma was 8. She had her mother's stubbornness and Ryan's tendency to go quiet when something was wrong. He had learned to read the silences. He had learned a lot of things about being a father that nobody taught you. You just absorbed them slowly, through trial and error and enough wrong moments to eventually understand what right looked like. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Harder than Kandahar. Harder than the 18 months that came after Kandahar that he didn't like to think about. Harder than walking away from the Navy with a medical discharge, a limp that had mostly healed, and the particular kind of hollowness that comes from losing the only identity you ever fully trusted. He ran a mechanic shop now, 3 blocks from his apartment. Walker Auto Repair. 6 bays, 2 full-time employees, enough business to keep the lights on and put Emma in a decent school, and occasionally save a little money. It wasn't what he had imagined for himself at 22 when he'd shipped out for the first time with 18 other men who all believed they were invincible. But it was quiet. It was honest. And most days, it was enough. He was halfway through his coffee when the woman at the center table caught his attention. She wasn't loud. She wasn't doing anything dramatic. It was the way she was sitting, posture tight, fingers drumming once on the edge of her laptop, jaw set just slightly too firm for someone who was supposed to be relaxed. Ryan had spent 12 years reading body language in environments where misreading it could get people killed, and what he read in her now was stress wearing the costume of composure. She looked to be in her early 30s, though she carried herself older. Dark blazer, dark hair pulled back, a coffee she hadn't touched. On the table in front of her were 2 organized stacks of documents held together with binder clips, and a laptop showing what looked like a dense financial spreadsheet. A leather portfolio bag sat at her feet with the zipper slightly open. Whoever she was meeting, she had prepared. He looked away and picked up his phone again. The front door opened at 9:17. Ryan didn't look up immediately. He registered the sound, the particular difference between one person entering and several people entering. And when he did glance toward the door, he counted 4 men coming in from the rain. 3 of them were arranged in a loose formation around the 4th, which wasn't something civilians did. The 3 outer men were big, built for presence, wearing the kind of dark coats that weren't designed for weather. They scanned the room as they entered, the way trained security personnel scan a room, briefly, methodically, landing on each exit point. The fourth man in the center walked differently. He walked like someone who had never once in his adult life considered that a door might be closed to him. Mid-50s, silver-haired, custom suit under an unbuttoned overcoat, a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than Ryan's garage. His face held an expression that was almost pleasantly neutral, the kind of neutral that comes from a man who has decided in advance how this interaction is going to go. Damian Cross. Ryan didn't know the name yet, he just watched. Cross walked through the cafe with the ease of a man walking through his own lobby. A few customers glanced up and then away. The barista behind the counter tracked the group with visible uncertainty, the way young people tracked situations that felt wrong but hadn't technically crossed any line yet. Cross didn't acknowledge the space around him. He moved directly toward the woman at the center table with the deliberateness of someone following a map he had already memorized. The woman looked up when she heard him approach. Something shifted in her expression, a fraction of a second, barely visible, and then it locked back into professional stillness. "Mr. Cross?" Her voice was even. "I wasn't expecting you until 10. I'm an early riser." Cross pulled a chair from the nearest empty table without asking and sat down opposite her, uninvited. His bodyguards repositioned, one near the door, one near the counter, one standing off to the side of the table at an angle that put him between Cross and the rest of the room. "Sophia, you look tired. Merger negotiations wearing you down?" "I'm fine." She closed the laptop slightly. "We could have had this conversation at the office." "I prefer neutral ground." He smiled, and the smile didn't reach anything above his mouth. "Less chance of your lawyers interrupting every 30 seconds. Sophia Bennett, Ryan still didn't know her name, didn't know any of this yet, kept her posture steady. "The terms are what they are. My legal team has been clear. If you're here to revisit the equity split, there's nothing to revisit. Novasec's cybersecurity platform is not part of the merger table, and my company retains full operational control of the security network. Those are the conditions. They haven't changed." Cross tilted his head slightly. "You know what I find fascinating about you, Sophia?" He said her name the way certain men say it, not as an identifier, but as a diminishment. "You've built something genuinely impressive for someone your age. 30 years old, running a company with $1 billion valuation. The press loves that story. They love putting your face on covers. Youngest female CEO in Pacific Northwest Tech. Very photogenic." She didn't respond. But photogenic doesn't negotiate. His voice dropped, still pleasant, still conversational, but thinned at the edges. "And what I'm hearing from your board, and yes, I have had conversations with your board, Sophia, I hope that isn't a surprise, is that not everyone shares your confidence in where this company is headed without outside capital. My board supports the current structure. Your board is nervous." He leaned forward slightly. "There's a difference. And nervous boards make changes." A few tables away, an older man in a raincoat had been reading a folded newspaper. He folded it smaller and set it down. The barista had found something very important to do with the coffee machine that allowed her to keep her back to the room. Ryan drank his coffee. Cross reached into his coat and produced a single sheet of paper. One page, folded in thirds. He opened it and placed it on the table facing Sophia with the precision of someone laying down a verdict. "New terms. My investment group takes a 49% controlling interest in Novasec's security division. Not the whole company, just the division. You keep your title, you keep your brand. I keep the platform." He spread his hands. "Everyone wins." Sophia didn't look at the paper. She looked at him. "That's not a merger offer," she said quietly. "That's an acquisition dressed in different language. You'd have operational authority over the entire security architecture. Our client contracts explicitly prohibit that kind of third-party access. Your client contracts can be renegotiated. Our clients are municipal governments and 2 branches of federal infrastructure. Governments change their minds all the time." He said it lightly, as if this were not the most disturbing thing that had been said in this conversation. That's practically their defining characteristic. Sophia closed the portfolio bag at her feet. Her voice stayed level, but Ryan, watching from across the room, sipping his coffee, could see the tightness in her hands now. She was working to maintain the calm. It was costing her. I'm going to ask you to leave, Mr. Cross. If you want to submit a revised offer through the appropriate legal channels, my team will review it. But this meeting is over. Cross didn't move. The smile slowly faded. You know, he said, and the pleasantness was gone now, stripped off like a coat in a warm room. I have been remarkably patient with you. I've given you months to come to your senses. I've had conversations I didn't need to have, made concessions I didn't need to make, and sat across tables from your lawyers pretending that your leverage was real. He stood, slowly. You're a 30-year-old woman who got lucky with a product and good timing, and a few venture capitalists who wanted to feel progressive. That is not a foundation. That is a moment, and moments end. A few people near the center of the cafe had stopped talking. You want to run a billion-dollar company? His voice rose just enough to fill the room. Not shouting, something worse than shouting. Controlled escalation, the kind meant to be heard. You're an overrated little girl playing dress-up in a boardroom, and everyone in that building who works for you knows it. They're just too polite to say it to your face. The cafe was completely quiet now. Ryan set his cup down. Nobody looked at Sophia. That was the thing he noticed first. Every person in the room, the couple by the window, the young man with the laptop, the woman reading a novel, the older man with the newspaper, had dropped their eyes. Not because they didn't care. People always cared. But caring and acting were two different muscles, and most people had spent a lifetime letting the first one go soft. Sophia sat with her back straight. Her coffee was still untouched. Her hands were flat on the table. She was not going to give him the satisfaction of visible trembling, and something about that, the specific effort of it, was the most quietly dignified thing Ryan had seen in a long time. I'm not going to sign anything, she said, calm and final. And I'd like you to leave before I call building security. Cross laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound. He looked at the bodyguard standing nearest and said something low that Ryan couldn't hear. Then he turned back to Sophia's table, and what happened next happened fast. He picked up her laptop. He didn't slam it. He just lifted it off the table with one hand and dropped it onto the floor, where it hit the tile hard enough that the screen cracked and the battery door popped loose and skittered under the neighboring chair. Then he picked up the 2 stacks of documents, the organized, binder-clipped, carefully prepared stacks, and tore them in half, just like that. Not with effort, just with contempt. He dropped the pieces on the floor beside the laptop. Then he reached into his coat again and produced a second document. This one was several pages, stapled. He placed it on the table in the exact spot where her materials had been. Sign it, he said. Sophia looked at the document. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up at him. No. Ryan stood up. He didn't do it dramatically. He didn't push his chair back hard or make a sound. He just stood, the way a person stands when they've made a decision, and the decision is already complete. He picked up his coffee and carried it with him as he walked toward the center of the room, which was such an ordinary thing to do, a man walking with his coffee, that it took a moment for anyone to register that he was walking toward the problem rather than away from it. The bodyguard near Cross noticed first. He shifted his weight and turned his body to face Ryan, who stopped at a distance of maybe 6 feet and stood there. Everything okay over here? Ryan said. His voice was completely conversational. No edge, no performance. He could have been asking about the weather. Cross looked at him the way powerful men look at people they have not yet categorized. Walk away, friend. Just finishing my coffee. Ryan looked at Sophia. You need anything? She stared at him. There was something in her expression that was equal parts disbelief and something more complicated. Not quite hope, but the recognition of an unexpected variable entering an equation she had thought was already solved. I said walk away. Cross's voice hardened. He nodded at the bodyguard nearest Ryan. The man moved. He was big, broad across the shoulders, the kind of built that comes from time in a weight room rather than time doing anything functional. And he moved with the confidence of someone who had handled this kind of situation before and found it easy. He grabbed Ryan's arm above the elbow, the standard grip, the one designed to turn and direct. Ryan didn't fight the grip. He moved with it, used the momentum, and in the space of maybe 2 seconds, the bodyguard was face down on a cafe table with his arm bent behind him at an angle that wasn't quite painful yet, but communicated very clearly what would happen next if anything further occurred. The other 2 came at once. Ryan released the first man and stepped left, and the second bodyguard's forward momentum carried him past where Ryan had been standing, and Ryan caught the third one by the wrist and redirected him into the second one, and both of them went sideways into a table that skidded 4 feet across the floor, scattering cups and a sugar dispenser that hit the tile and cracked open. The first bodyguard tried to get up, and Ryan put a hand on the back of his neck. Not hard, just firmly enough to communicate something, and said quietly, "Don't." He didn't. None of them did. The whole thing had lasted maybe 12 seconds. Ryan straightened up. He was breathing slightly harder than before, but not much. His coffee cup was still in his left hand. He hadn't spilled any. The cafe was absolutely silent. Cross stood perfectly still. For the first time since he had walked in, the pleasantness was completely gone, not replaced by rage, but by something colder. He looked at Ryan with the particular expression of a man recalculating something. Ryan looked back at him without expression. "I think it's time for you to go," Ryan said. Cross reached inside his coat. For a half-second, every instinct Ryan had sharpened and compressed into readiness. And then Cross produced only a phone. He looked at Ryan over the screen as he raised it. "I know every person in this city," Cross said. "You have no idea what you've just done." He turned and walked out. His bodyguards followed, the first one still rolling his shoulder, the other two avoiding eye contact with everything in the room. The door swung shut behind them, and the rain was briefly audible, and then the door closed, and there was only silence. Ryan set his coffee on the nearest clean table. He looked around the cafe. A few people were staring at him. The barista had both hands flat on the counter and her mouth slightly open. The older man with the newspaper had finally looked up, and there was something in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like the look of someone who has just remembered something they had almost forgotten. Ryan picked up the laptop battery cover from under the chair where it had slid. He found the battery itself a few feet away and pressed both pieces back into the cracked casing and set the laptop on the table in front of Sophia. She was still sitting exactly where she had been. She hadn't moved through any of it. Now she looked at him, really looked at him, and said nothing for a moment. "Thank you," she said finally. Ryan pulled his jacket straight. "You should probably call someone about that laptop." "Who are you?" He picked up his coffee. "Walker Auto Repair," he said. "On 5th. If your car ever needs work." He went back to his table in the corner, sat down, and finished his coffee. Outside, the rain kept coming. The silence in Meridian Coffee lasted about 40 seconds after Damian Cross walked out. Then someone near the window exhaled audibly, and it was like a signal. Chairs shifted. Someone laughed nervously. The barista turned back to her machine and started doing something with the steam wand that produced a great deal of noise for no apparent reason. People returned to their phones, their laptops, their conversations, with the particular determined normalcy of people who had witnessed something they hadn't decided how to feel about yet. Ryan sat in his corner and looked at his phone. 10:24 a.m. He had about 4.5 hours before school pickup. He should get back to the garage. He had a transmission job that needed finishing and a brake pad replacement he had promised by end of day, and Marcus, his senior mechanic, had texted earlier about an issue with the alignment rack that Ryan needed to look at personally. He should pay for his coffee and walk out the same way he'd walked in, quietly, without drama, disappearing back into the Tuesday he had planned. He was reaching for his jacket when Sophia appeared at his table. She didn't ask if she could sit. She pulled out the chair across from him, the same chair Damian Cross had stolen from another table 40 minutes earlier, and sat down and put both hands flat on the surface in front of her, which was something she seemed to do when she needed to anchor herself. Her laptop was in her bag, cracked screen and all. The torn documents were still on the floor by her original table. She had left them there. "I need to ask you something," she said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't." She looked at him steadily. She had dark brown eyes and the kind of direct gaze that either came from confidence or from spending so long performing confidence that the two had become indistinguishable. "Who are you?" "I told you, mechanic." "Mechanics don't do what you just did." "Some do." He folded his jacket over the back of his chair. "You should document what happened, photos of your equipment, the torn documents. File a police report today, not tomorrow. You'll want a record before his people have time to adjust the narrative." She stared at him. "You're giving me legal advice now." "Practical advice. There's a difference." She was quiet for a moment. The barista came by and refilled Ryan's cup without being asked, glanced at Sophia, and retreated quickly. He's going to come back, Sophia said. Not personally. He'll send people. Lawyers, probably. Maybe someone to talk to my board. She paused. He already has been talking to my board. I found out 2 weeks ago. 3 of my 7 directors have had private meetings with representatives from his investment group. I don't know what was said. I don't know who else might be compromised. Ryan looked at her. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only person in that room who didn't look at the floor. She said it without sentiment, just flatly as an observable fact. And because I don't have a lot of options right now, and you clearly know things that a mechanic from Fifth Avenue shouldn't know. He didn't answer right away. Outside, the rain was still going, softer now, the hard part of the morning storm having passed and left behind a steady gray drizzle that softened the edges of the buildings across the street. A bus went by. A woman with a yellow umbrella crossed at the corner. I was Navy, he said finally. A long time ago, that's all. Special operations? He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Sophia nodded slowly. Damien Cross isn't just a difficult investor. I want you to understand that. He's not just aggressive or unethical or the kind of man who throws his weight around because he can. There's something else underneath it. The way he talks about our security platform. He knows too much. Technical specifics that shouldn't be in any public filing, any prospectus, anything his team should have access to. He knows our encryption architecture. He knows our federal contract parameters. I have one person on my technical team who could have given him that information, and that person has been with me for 4 years, and I don't want to believe it, but I don't know. She exhaled. I feel like I'm standing on ground that keeps shifting, and I don't know where the solid parts are. Ryan looked at her for a long moment. A father's discipline, he had learned it with Emma, was the discipline of knowing when to say yes and when to hold a boundary, and the two were often indistinguishable in the moment. He had a transmission job. He had a daughter to pick up at 3. Get a lawyer you trust, he said, not a firm that's ever had any contact with Cross's people. Someone completely separate. Document everything. Keep moving. He stood. That's the best advice I have. That's it? That's it. He picked up his jacket. What's your name? He hesitated. Ryan, he said. Sophia. She didn't offer her hand. Thank you, Ryan. I mean it. He nodded once and walked out into the rain. He was 2 blocks from the garage when he realized he had left his phone on the cafe table. He stood on the wet sidewalk for a moment, rain on the back of his neck, and considered just going back for it. Simple. 5 minutes. Nothing complicated. His phone was on the table where he'd set it, screen down. He picked it up. Sophia was still there, standing now, gathering what remained of her things. She had a phone to her ear and was speaking quietly and seriously to whoever was on the other end. She glanced at him when he came back in, and there was something in her expression, a fraction of relief, quickly controlled, as if some part of her had been hoping he might come back. He raised the phone to indicate why he'd returned and headed back toward the door. Ryan. Her voice, not loud, just directed. He stopped. She lowered her phone from her ear. He's going to do something, she said. I don't know what, but I know how men like him operate. You embarrassed him in a room full of people. That's not something he absorbs and moves on from. Whatever comes next, it's not going to be aimed only at me. He looked at her. I appreciate the warning, he said. He meant it. But he also went back to the garage. Marcus had the alignment rack issue sorted by the time Ryan arrived, which was a relief, and the transmission job took most of the afternoon. A 2009 Silverado with about 180,000 miles on it, and the kind of owner who had ignored every warning sign for approximately 3 years. Ryan worked on it with the specific, focused satisfaction that came from problems that had concrete solutions. A transmission either worked or it didn't. The fix was either right or it wasn't. There was no ambiguity, no negotiation, no reading between lines. He liked that about mechanical work. He had liked it from the first day, when a friend had offered him a bay to use after the discharge, and Ryan had discovered that taking something broken and making it run again was, for reasons he had never fully articulated, exactly the kind of work his mind could settle into. He picked Emma up at 3:05, 5 minutes late, which she noted with the specific reproachfulness of an 8-year-old who had been waiting. You're late, she said, climbing into the truck with her backpack and a drawing she'd made of a horse that didn't look entirely like a horse, but that Ryan would put on the refrigerator door with the others. By 5 minutes. 5 minutes is still late, Dad. You're right. I'm sorry. She considered this and apparently decided it was sufficient. Ms. Petrakis says I'm advanced in reading. I know. She told me at the conference. She said I read at a 5th grade level. That's great, Em. I know. She said it without false modesty, as a simple fact, which was a quality Ryan found both exasperating and quietly wonderful in her. Can we get noodle soup? There's food at home. But I want noodle soup. There's leftover rice and chicken at home. She made a sound that expressed her position on leftover rice and chicken with considerable clarity. Ryan drove through the wet streets of the Pike district with the heater running and Emma telling him in detail about a disagreement with a boy named Cameron, over whose turn it had been on the classroom computer, and he listened with most of his attention and gave the rest to the rear-view mirror. He wasn't being followed. He was fairly certain of that. But he checked anyway, because that was a habit in the same category as watching exits when he entered a room, and both of them had been too useful for too long to stop now. He made the rice and chicken that night. Emma ate it without further complaint after he added hot sauce, which was apparently the solution. She did her reading homework, and he sat across from her at the kitchen table and looked over some invoices that needed sorting, and it was ordinary and quiet in a way he had once thought he would never have and now tried not to take for granted. I was loading the dishwasher when his phone rang. Unknown number, Seattle area code. He almost let it go to voicemail. Instead, he picked up. Mr. Walker. A man's voice, professional, slightly formal. My name is Gregory Hale. I'm Damian Cross's chief legal counsel. I'm calling as a courtesy. Ryan waited. Our client has decided not to pursue any formal complaint regarding the incident this morning, which we think reflects considerable good faith on his part, given the circumstances. However, he does want to make sure you understand the full context of what you've inserted yourself into. A pause. You have a business, I understand. Walker Auto Repair. You have a daughter enrolled at Cascade Elementary. We're not making any kind of threat, Mr. Walker. I want to be absolutely clear about that. We're simply encouraging you to consider, carefully, whether continued involvement in Ms. Bennett's situation is in your interest or your family's interest. Ryan stood at the kitchen counter with the dishwasher open and a plate in his hand. Emma was in the living room. He could hear her humming something, a song she'd learned at school, 4 notes repeated in a loop that had become the background music of his evenings for the past 2 weeks. Tell your client, Ryan said, keeping his voice level, that I went to a cafe and drank coffee this morning. If that's the kind of involvement he's worried about, we don't have anything to talk about. Mr. Walker, don't call this number again. He hung up. He stood there for a moment. The plate was still in his hand. He set it in the rack and closed the dishwasher and stood at the counter for a while, listening to Emma hum her 4-note song. They knew his daughter's school. That was the thing he kept coming back to. Not the implied threat, not the practiced legal language designed to communicate menace while maintaining plausible deniability, but the fact that they had pulled that specific detail and put it in the conversation. That was a message. Not subtle, not accidental. He checked the locks on the front door and the back door before he went to bed. He told himself it was the same as always. He checked the locks every night. But he checked them twice that night. By Wednesday morning, Ryan had 3 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. He didn't return them. Marcus texted to say that 2 fleet accounts, a landscaping company and a delivery service that together accounted for almost a quarter of the garage's regular business, had both called to cancel their contracts without explanation. Ryan sat in the office of the garage with the door closed and looked at the numbers on his screen. 2 fleet accounts wasn't catastrophic. He had margins enough to absorb the month. Maybe 2 months. But it was a pressure point, and it had been applied quickly, and he had no doubt about where the instruction had originated. He called his accountant to get a clear picture of where things stood. He called a former teammate named Dom Reyes, who he hadn't spoken to in about 7 months, and left a voicemail that said only, "Call me when you get this." Then he unlocked the garage and went to work, because the work was there, and it didn't care about any of the rest of it. It was just after noon when Sophia Bennett walked through the bay door. She was wearing different clothes than yesterday: dark jeans, a gray jacket, a scarf she had pulled up slightly against the damp. She looked like she had slept about as well as Ryan had. She stood just inside the door and looked around the garage with the expression of someone who had never been in one and wasn't sure where to put herself. "I found you through the business registration," she said. Okay. Can we talk somewhere? He wiped his hands on a shop rag and nodded toward the office. She followed him in, and he closed the door. The office was small. A desk, two chairs, a filing cabinet, a bulletin board covered in invoices, and a drawing Emma had done of a dog 2 years ago that Ryan had somehow never taken down. Sophia looked at the drawing for a second, then looked at him. "Two of my board members called me this morning," she said, "independently, within an hour of each other. Both of them told me that Damien Cross's people have been in contact again, and both of them are now recommending that I reconsider the acquisition offer." She said it the way people said things they were still too angry to fully process, evenly, but with an edge underneath. "One of them has been on my board since I was 26 years old. He watched me build this company from a conference room in my apartment, and he called me this morning and told me that he thinks it might be time to be realistic about what Novasec can and can't accomplish independently." He say it in those words? Close enough. She sat down in one of the chairs without waiting to be invited. "They're going to call an emergency board session. I have maybe 72 hours before they put a formal vote on the table. If they vote to approve the acquisition, I lose operational control of the security division. That's..." She stopped, started again. "That platform serves 14 state government networks and 3 federal agencies. If Cross takes control of the access infrastructure, he doesn't just own the platform, he owns the keys." Ryan leaned against the desk. "What does he actually want with it?" "I've been thinking about that since yesterday." She folded her hands in her lap. Her knuckles were slightly white. "He can't sell it openly. The contracts have federal disclosure clauses, there are oversight mechanisms. But if he controls the architecture quietly, through what looks like a legitimate acquisition, there are things you could do. Data routing, access windows, building back doors into government-facing infrastructure and selling that access to parties who would pay a significant amount not to be identified." The garage outside was audible, the sound of Marcus running a socket wrench, the radio playing something with too much bass. Ordinary sounds from an ordinary Tuesday that had somehow become part of a conversation Ryan had not planned to be having. "You need to take this to the FBI," he said. "I know, I'm working on that. But I need more than what I have right now. I have suspicions and patterns and one financial transaction that's hard to explain. That's not enough for a federal agency to move quickly, and quickly is what I need." She looked at him directly. "I need someone who understands how operations like this work from the inside, who understands how men like Cross protect themselves, where the vulnerabilities are, what kind of evidence is actually useful versus what just looks useful." Ryan was quiet. "You were special operations," she said. "I don't know exactly what branch or what you did. I'm not asking. But I know that the way you handled 3 trained security personnel in 12 seconds in a coffee shop is not something you learn in a gym, and I know that the advice you gave me afterward was precise and specific and came from someone who has dealt with hostile actors in high-stakes situations." She paused. "I'm not asking you to put yourself in danger. I'm asking you to help me understand what I'm looking at." "You already put me in danger," Ryan said. Not harshly. "Cross's lawyer called my house last night. He mentioned my daughter's school." Something shifted in her expression. A flash of something she didn't control quickly enough. Guilt, maybe. Or something close to it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know he'd move that fast." "He moved fast because someone who moved fast put him in a corner yesterday morning." He didn't say it with accusation, just with the flatness of observable fact. "I'm not blaming you. I made my own choices. But I need you to understand that I have an 8-year-old at home, and that changes every calculation." "I understand." "Do you?" She met his eyes and didn't look away. "Yes." He looked at the drawing on the bulletin board. The dog had disproportionate ears and 5 legs, which Emma had explained was because she had run out of space on one side and didn't want to leave it out. He had found the logic entirely reasonable. "Tell me about the financial transaction," he said. She leaned forward slightly. 3 months ago, Cross's holding company made a series of payments to a shell corporation registered in Delaware. The amounts are structured to stay just below federal reporting thresholds, classic layering technique. The shell company has a single listed asset, which is a data consulting firm based out of Vancouver with no public clients and no digital footprint beyond a registration address. She had clearly been over this so many times it came out in clean, ordered sentences. The data consulting firm has one employee of record, a man named Victor Slade, who has no professional history prior to 2019. I had a forensic accountant look at the payment structure. Her assessment was that it's consistent with payment for access, not services, not consulting, access. Ryan had been watching her hands as she talked. They had stopped being white at the knuckles. When she got into the specifics, she steadied, which told him something about how her mind worked. Better on terrain she had mapped, calmer in the details than in the open air of the general problem. "Victor Slade," he said. "That name means something to you?" "No, but names like that sometimes do." He pushed off the desk. "Send me the financial documents, everything your accountant gave you, and everything you have on the shell company. Don't email it. Get it to me physically, printed, or on an encrypted drive." She looked at him. "Does that mean you're going to help?" He stood at the office window that looked out onto the bay floor where Marcus was working on a radiator replacement, and the radio was still going. Normal. All of it completely and deceptively normal. "It means I'm going to look at what you have," he said. "That's all it means right now." She nodded. She understood the difference and didn't push past it. He found that he appreciated that more than he would have expected. "I'll have it to you by tonight," she said, standing. "And Ryan," she stopped at the door. "I know you didn't choose this. I know you went in for coffee and ended up somewhere you didn't plan to be. I don't take that lightly." He nodded once and turned back toward the garage. What he didn't tell her, what he wouldn't have known how to articulate even if he had wanted to, was that the phone call the previous night had already moved this from the category of something he could walk away from. Not because of him, because of Emma. Because someone had said her name and her school in a context designed to make him feel the weight of it. And there was a version of Ryan Walker who might have absorbed that and retreated further into the quiet life he had built. And there was a version who recognized that retreating from men like Damian Cross didn't make the threat smaller. It made it permanent. He picked up his shop rag and went back to work. The Silverado transmission wasn't going to finish itself, and he had a brake job promised by 5, and Marcus needed to leave early for something with his kids. The afternoon ran the way afternoons ran. One thing after another, each one demanding the specific part of his attention it required. The rest of his mind working on things he hadn't yet put into words. Dom Reyes called back at 4:47. Ryan stepped outside the bay door into the thin drizzle to take it. Dom's voice was the same as always, slightly too loud, slightly too cheerful. The particular performance of a man who had seen enough bleak things that he had decided a long time ago to run in the opposite direction. "Walker, it's been a minute." "It has." "You sound like something's on your mind." "You remember a name? Victor Slade." A pause on the other end. "Not long. But there." "Where'd you hear that name?" Dom asked, and his voice had lost the cheerfulness. Just like that, clean and sudden, the way a light goes out. Ryan looked at the wet street and the parked cars and the ordinary Tuesday afternoon going on around him. "Tell me what you know," he said. Dom Reyes didn't talk for long. That was the thing about Dom. When something actually mattered, the volume came down and the words got spare. He said enough. Victor Slade was not a data consultant. He was not, in any meaningful sense, a person with a professional history in any legitimate industry. What he was, according to Dom, was a name that had surfaced 3 separate times in the last 4 years in connection with classified technology breaches. Once in a DoD contractor audit in 2022, once in an NSA internal review that Dom had no business knowing about, but knew about anyway, and once in a joint task force investigation that had been quietly shelved after 2 of its lead investigators were reassigned under circumstances that nobody had explained clearly. "He's a broker," Dom said. "Not the hands-on type. He doesn't steal anything himself. He identifies assets, usually embedded in corporate infrastructure, sometimes government adjacent, and he builds the access pathway and sells it to whoever's buying. Clean hands, technically. Hard to pin." "And Cross?" Another pause. "Cross's name doesn't appear in anything I have direct access to. But the Slade connection, if you've got financials showing money moving from Cross to that Vancouver shell, that's not a coincidence. That's the architecture." Ryan stood outside in the drizzle and thought about Sophia's description of Novasec's platform. 14 state government networks, 3 federal agencies. The keys, she had said. "Who's buying?" Ryan asked. "That's what nobody's been able to confirm. The task force that got shelved was working that angle. 2 investigators reassigned. Files transferred to a different division and apparently not prioritized. Dom's voice had a particular flatness to it now. Somebody with reach made that happen, Walker. This isn't just a corrupt businessman playing acquisition games. Ryan was quiet. You want to tell me how you got onto this? Dom asked. Coffee. Come again? I'll explain later. Can you make some calls? I can make some calls. A pause. This connected to that cafe thing on the news? Ryan hadn't seen the news. He said so. Check it, Dom said and hung up. Ryan went back inside the garage and pulled up the local news on his phone while Marcus finished the last brake job of the day. The story had already been picked up by 2 Seattle outlets and 1 regional aggregator. The headline on the first one read, Violent Altercation at Pike District Cafe, Business Owner Identified as Aggressor. There was a photograph, a still frame from what appeared to be security footage, grainy and poorly lit, showing Ryan mid-movement with one of Cross's bodyguards. From that angle, without context, without the 10 seconds preceding it, it looked exactly like what the headline said it was. A man attacking someone, unprovoked, from the way it read. The article didn't name him. It described him as a local business owner in his late 30s. It quoted an anonymous witness who said the man had appeared agitated and confrontational from the moment he sat down. It quoted Gregory Hale, Cross's attorney, who expressed his client's concern for public safety and his hope that authorities would review the full security record. The full security record. Ryan set his phone face down on the workbench. So that was how it was going to go. He called Emma's school the next morning before he opened the garage, spoke to the principal, and arranged without explanation for Emma to be kept in supervised indoor activities during recess for the rest of the week. He said there had been a family security concern and that he would explain more soon. The principal, to her credit, asked only one clarifying question and then said she would take care of it. Emma, that evening, was not pleased. I don't understand why I can't go outside, she said at dinner. She had eaten about half her pasta and was now moving the rest of it around with her fork in a pattern that communicated the depth of her dissatisfaction. Cameron said it was because I'm in trouble. I'm not in trouble. You're not in trouble. Then why? Because I asked them to keep a closer eye on you for a few days. He kept his voice even, matter of fact. Emma had a sensitivity to adult anxiety that most children her age didn't have. She had developed it early, after her mother left, some finely calibrated antenna for the emotional weather in a room. He had learned that lying to her, even by omission, usually backfired. But there were gradations. There's a situation with something I got involved in, and I'm handling it, and until it's handled, I want to make sure you're somewhere I know is safe. She looked at him with the particular gravity of an 8-year-old who is taking something seriously. What kind of situation? The adult kind. Does it have to do with that thing on the news? Keisha's mom showed it to her and Keisha told me at lunch. Ryan put his fork down. What did Keisha say? She said her mom said you hurt someone. I told her that was wrong. Emma said this without apparent anxiety. She said it the way she said things she was certain about. You don't hurt people unless they're doing something wrong first. That's the rule. He looked at his daughter across the kitchen table. She had pasta sauce on her chin and an expression of complete and uncomplicated loyalty that hit him somewhere behind the sternum in a way he wasn't prepared for. That's right, he said. That is the rule. She went back to her pasta. Okay, so you're handling it. I'm handling it. Good. She paused. Can I still go to Lily's birthday party on Saturday? Yes. Okay. She seemed satisfied. The matter for her was resolved. He envied the architecture of that, the clean compartments, the trust that the adult with responsibility for the large problems was managing them, leaving the relevant concerns to their appropriate scale. He had not had that kind of faith in any person or system for a very long time, maybe not since before Kandahar. The documents from Sophia arrived Thursday morning. A young woman Ryan had never seen, an assistant, presumably, came into the garage at 8:15 with a sealed envelope and left without giving her name. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note in Sophia's handwriting that said only, "Everything I have, including the thing I didn't mention yesterday." He didn't look at the drive until Emma was at school and the garage was open and Marcus was handling the morning intake. He sat in the office with the door closed and his own laptop, not the garage computer, and went through what Sophia had compiled. She was thorough. More thorough than he had expected, though maybe he shouldn't have been surprised. She had been building this file quietly for weeks, maybe longer, and it showed the specific kind of organized intelligence that came from someone who was frightened but not panicking, who had decided that her best defense was documentation rather than reaction. There were the financial records her accountant had flagged, the structured payments to the Delaware Shell, the Vancouver consulting firm, the employment record for Victor Slade that stopped abruptly in 2019, and then resumed with no gap explained. There were internal communications, emails, 2 of them, from a Novasec technical director named Warren Chu that on their surface appeared to be routine vendor correspondence, but contained embedded attachments that, when opened, were clearly copies of proprietary system architecture files, files that Chu had no legitimate reason to be sending to an external address. Warren Chu. 4 years. The person she hadn't wanted to believe. The thing she hadn't mentioned yesterday was a photograph, printed on regular paper, slightly grainy, the kind of image pulled from a longer video. It showed Damien Cross at what appeared to be a private dinner. Restaurant setting, low lighting, maybe 8 people around a table. To Cross's left was a man Ryan didn't recognize. To Cross's right was a man he did. His name was Admiral Francis Holt, retired. He had run the Navy's Intelligence Coordination Office for 6 years before his retirement in 2021. Ryan had never worked directly with him. But in the world Ryan had inhabited for 12 years, certain names carried weight by reputation rather than direct contact. And Holt's name carried the particular weight of a man whose decisions had shaped operational realities for a lot of people who never knew his name. If Holt was at that table, this had dimensions that went well past corporate acquisition. He sat back in his chair. The radio outside played something he didn't listen to. He could hear Marcus talking to a customer about a coolant flush, the patient explanatory tone Marcus used with people who didn't understand cars. Kind, never condescending. Ryan had hired him 4 years ago on the basis of a conversation that lasted 20 minutes, and it was one of the better decisions he had made in the civilian half of his life. He took a photograph of the dinner image with his phone and sent it to Dom with no message. Dom replied 6 minutes later with a single word. Where? Ryan typed back, later, working on it. He called Sophia at 9:30. She answered on the second ring. Background noise. She was somewhere with other people, or near them. Hold on. A pause, the sound of a door, then quiet. Okay? You looked at everything? I did. The Chu emails. Do you still have him at the company? He's on administrative leave as of yesterday. I told him it was a performance review matter. He accepted it without pushing back, which told me something. It told you he knows why. Yes. And the photograph, the dinner. A moment of quiet. I had someone I trust run it through a facial recognition search. The man on the left, I don't know him. The man on the right is, I know who he is, Ryan said. Another pause, and in it he could hear her recalibrating the scope of what she had brought to him. When she spoke again, her voice was slightly more careful. Does that change things? It changes the scale of things, not the direction. He paused. The board meeting. Can you delay it? I've been trying. My corporate attorney says I can request a procedural hold for up to 5 business days if I can document that the circumstances of the request were coercive. The phone calls, the timeline, the way the acquisition offer was delivered, it might be enough. It buys me until next Thursday. Do it today. I was planning to. She paused. Ryan, I need to know if you're in this or if I need to find another way. He looked at the printed photograph on his desk. A retired admiral at a private dinner with a man who built access pathways into government infrastructure. I'm looking into it, he said. That's still what it is. Okay. She accepted it. What do you need from me? Keep going into the office. Keep acting like you're managing this internally through legal channels. Don't give Cross any indication that you've got more than what you've already told his people you have. If Chu surfaces anything, a message, a contact, anything that seems out of pattern, you tell me before you act on it. And what are you doing? Having some conversations. He spent the rest of Thursday on the phone. Dom had a name for the man on the left in the photograph by early afternoon. Elias Varno, described as a German national with dual citizenship who had operated in the gray space between private equity and intelligence contracting for the better part of a decade. He was not on any public watch list. He was not in any law enforcement database Dom could access. He existed at that specific altitude where the money was large enough and the connections careful enough that the usual mechanisms of accountability found no purchase. Dom said carefully, "This is bigger than what I can work through informal channels. If you want this to go anywhere real, it needs federal attention and it needs it through the right door, not the front door." What's the right door? There's an agent named Carla Mendez. She's in the FBI's Organized Financial Crime Unit, Pacific Northwest Division. She's been building a file on Cross for about 8 months, from what I understand. Nobody's pointed her at the national security angle because nobody's connected it yet. A pause. I can make an introduction. But Walker, if this goes where I think it's going, you need to be prepared for the fact that it gets bigger before it gets smaller. And the people who made that task force investigation disappear are still in positions where they can do it again. Ryan thought about Emma at school, supervised, inside during recess. "Set up the meeting," he said. The meeting with Agent Mendez happened Friday afternoon at a location of her choosing, a parking structure on the east side of downtown, 3rd level, where she arrived in a gray sedan and got out and shook Ryan's hand with the directness of someone who had dispensed with preamble as a professional habit. She was in her mid-40s, lean, with the kind of face that revealed almost nothing by default, and then revealed quite a lot when she decided to let it. She looked at Ryan with the assessing quality of someone who had spent a significant portion of her career reading people quickly and accurately. "Dom Reyes says you have something I need to see," she said. "I have a photograph and financial records." "Show me." He had printed the materials and put them in a plain folder. He handed it to her and she went through it standing next to her car, taking her time, not rushing the process. She stopped at the dinner photograph for longer than she stopped at anything else. "Where did you get this?" she asked, and her voice had a quality it hadn't had 30 seconds earlier. "From the CEO of the company Cross is trying to acquire." Mendez looked up from the photograph. "Sophia Bennett. You know who she is?" "She's adjacent to my file on Cross. I've been watching the acquisition attempt." She looked back at the photograph. "This is the first time I've seen Holt's name connected to Cross directly." She paused. "And Varno." "You know Varno." "I know the name." She closed the folder. She looked at Ryan in the way that people looked at pieces that didn't fit where they initially expected them to fit. "What's your involvement in this? And please don't tell me you're just a mechanic." "I was Navy," Ryan said. "Special operations. I've been out for 3 years. I went into a cafe on Tuesday morning and ended up in the middle of something." She studied him. Then, apparently deciding something, she nodded once. "The financial records Bennett gave you, they're consistent with what I've been building for 8 months. The Slade connection is the piece I didn't have." She tapped the folder. "If I can get Bennett to cooperate formally, provide these records through proper channels, provide testimony about the board coercion, combined with what I have, I can open a full investigation rather than a preliminary inquiry. That changes what resources I can deploy and how fast." "What does formal cooperation require from her?" "A meeting, recorded testimony, agreement not to take any independent action that could compromise the investigation." Mendez paused. "And you? I need to know your role. If you're going to be involved in this, I need to know how." Ryan looked at the parked cars and the concrete pillars of the structure and the slice of gray Seattle sky, visible through the open side of the level. "I'm trying to protect a woman who got pulled into something she didn't ask for, and make sure my kid can go to recess next week without me worrying about it. That's my involvement." Mendez looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression shifted slightly. Not softened exactly, but acknowledged. "Okay," she said. "Can you get Bennett to me by tomorrow morning?" "I can try." He drove from the parking structure back through the Pike District and sat outside the garage for a few minutes without going in. The afternoon was darkening, the street lights coming on early the way they did in November in Seattle, and the shop windows along the block were lit yellow and ordinary, and the foot traffic was the regular end-of-workday kind. People going home. People with somewhere to be, unaware of the things that happened in the invisible layers of the world just adjacent to their ordinary Friday. Ryan was tired in a way that was different from physical tired. It was the tiredness that came from operating under sustained alertness, not the clean exhaustion of a mission with defined parameters. but the grinding wakefulness of civilian danger, which had no clear edges and no established doctrine and no team structure and no comm system and no extraction protocol. He had been 3 years getting used to not having those things. He had made his peace with the loss of them, mostly. Now they were relevant again, and the machine of him that knew how to operate in that context was running, but it was running on 3-year-old fuel and without the infrastructure that had once surrounded it. He had a thought about calling someone. His mother, maybe, who lived in Portland and called him every Sunday and asked about Emma's school, and never asked about anything she sensed he didn't want to discuss. He didn't call her. There was nothing she could do, and telling her would only add a weight she would carry in silence. He went inside and opened the garage for the last 2 hours of the day. Marcus left at 4:30 to get his kids from his ex-wife's place. Ryan worked alone on a Jeep with a leaking differential, the kind of job that was straightforward enough to do without thinking about it, which was exactly what he needed right now. His hands found the work, and his mind ran on its own track. Through the photograph, through Mendez's reaction to Varno's name, through the architecture that Sophia had laid out about what a controlled access pathway through Novasec's platform could enable, through the quiet, specific weight of the name Francis Holt sitting at a dinner table with Damian Cross and a European broker who didn't appear in any watch list. The news that evening, while Emma was doing homework, ran a follow-up piece about the cafe incident. This one was worse. They had found the name, a source, they said, had identified Ryan Walker, owner of Walker Auto Repair on Fifth Avenue, as the individual involved in Tuesday's altercation. There was a brief interview with someone described as a regular cafe customer who said he had watched the incident and found the whole thing very alarming. There was no mention of Sophia Bennett. There was no mention of Damian Cross. There was no mention of torn documents or a shoved woman or the reason any of it had happened. There was only a man with a name and a business address who had, allegedly, attacked 3 people in a coffee shop. Ryan's phone rang 11 times between 6 and 9 p.m. He answered none of them. He put Emma to bed at 8:30, which was 30 minutes later than her usual time, because she was in the middle of a book, and he didn't have the energy to fight the negotiation that would involve. He sat on the edge of her bed while she read the last chapter, listening to the sound of pages turning and the rain starting again outside, and the particular silence of an apartment where a child was present, which was a different kind of silence than any other. When she fell asleep with the book on her chest, he took it and put the bookmark in and set it on her nightstand. He sat there for another minute in the dark. He was not afraid for himself. That was the honest accounting of it. The fear, when he located it, was entirely directional. It was pointed at this room, this bed, this child who had told him matter-of-factly at dinner that she had defended his name to a classmate because she knew what the rule was. He went to the kitchen and sat at the table and called Sophia. She answered immediately, as if she had been waiting. Maybe she had. "I have a meeting set up," he said, "FBI, tomorrow morning. She's serious and she's been working this for 8 months. She needs your records and your testimony." A long pause. He heard her exhale. "Okay," she said. "It's going to get harder before it gets easier. You need to understand that." "I do understand that." "Once you're formally in it, there's no quiet exit. Cross will know. His people will know. The board pressure is going to increase, not decrease, and it may get personal. It already is personal." Her voice was even, but tired in the same way Ryan was tired, the kind of tired that came from holding something heavy for too long and refusing to put it down. "He came into a public place and destroyed my work and put his hands on me in front of a room full of people because he thought I wouldn't have anyone in my corner. He was right about the room full of people." She paused. "He was wrong about the corner." Ryan looked at the kitchen table, the place where Emma had eaten dinner, and told him he was handling it, and asked about the birthday party on Saturday. "I'll text you the time and location," he said. He ended the call and sat in the quiet kitchen and thought about a version of Tuesday morning where he had gone back for his phone, found it on the table, and walked out of Meridian Coffee without stopping. Where he had driven to the garage and worked the transmission job and picked Emma up on time, and made rice and chicken, and heard about Cameron and the classroom computer and sat across from his daughter in the ordinary evening of his ordinary life. He thought about that version for a while. Then he went to the closet where he kept, on the top shelf behind a box of Emma's old drawings, a locked case he had not opened in 3 years. He looked at it for a moment. He left it where it was. He wasn't there yet. He needed to be honest with himself about that. There was a process between here and there, and the process was named Carla Mendez and recorded testimony and financial evidence and the particular machinery of federal law working in the direction it was supposed to work. He needed to give that process room to function. He needed to believe in it enough to let it run. But he brought the case down off the shelf and put it on the bedroom floor beside the bed, just in case the process needed a contingency. Outside, the rain picked up again, hitting the window in the irregular pattern that meant wind had joined it, and somewhere on the block a car alarm went off and then stopped. And Seattle went on being itself, gray and wet and indifferent and alive, full of people who had no idea that the ground underneath a particular set of decisions was shifting, quietly, toward something that was going to matter more than anyone yet understood. Ryan lay on top of the covers and looked at the ceiling. He was asleep in 4 minutes, which was a skill the Navy had given him that he had never once complained about keeping. Carla Mendez was already there when they arrived Saturday morning, standing beside her gray sedan in the parking lot of a small insurance office that was closed for the weekend, holding a coffee cup that looked like it had been in her hand for a while. She watched Ryan's truck pull in and then Sophia's black sedan a minute behind it, and she had the focused stillness of someone who had been thinking about this meeting since the day before. Sophia had brought her forensic accountant, a compact, precise woman in her 50s named Janet Okafor, who carried 2 identical copies of every document in separate folders, which told Ryan something about how she operated. Ryan had brought nothing except himself and the awareness that he was functioning here as a bridge between 2 worlds that didn't normally have points of contact, and that his usefulness was in that specific capacity, not in anything more dramatic. The 4 of them sat in Mendez's car because the morning was cold and the office was closed, and there was nowhere else with any privacy. It was tight. Mendez had a recorder running on the dashboard that she had pointed out and explained before she turned it on, which Ryan appreciated. No ambiguity, no games about what was and wasn't being documented. Sophia went through everything methodically. The financial records, Warren Chu's emails, the dinner photograph, the board contacts, the coercive timeline, the phone call to Gregory Hale. She spoke for a long time without interruption, and when she finished, she folded her hands in her lap and waited. Mendez was quiet for a moment, looking at the folder Okafor had provided. "The Varno photograph," she said. "I need to know specifically where this was taken and when, if you have it." "My source placed it at a private dinner in Portland approximately 14 months ago," Sophia said. "I can get more specific date information, but I'd need 24 hours. "Get it." Mendez looked at the photograph again. "The Slade payment structure you've documented here, combined with what I've been building on Cross's holding company activity over the last 8 months. This is enough to move from preliminary inquiry to a full financial crimes investigation. I can have that authorization by Monday." She looked up at Sophia. "But I need you to understand something. Once this is formally open, I cannot control the pace at which Cross is notified through his legal channels that he's under investigation. His attorneys will find out, and when they do, pressure on your board is going to accelerate, not stop." "Ryan told me the same thing," Sophia said. "He was right." Mendez glanced at Ryan briefly. "What I can do is move fast enough that the board meeting becomes irrelevant before it happens. If I can get authorization Monday and move on the financial records subpoena by Tuesday, we're looking at a process that freezes Cross's ability to execute any acquisition legally while the investigation is active." She paused. "But I need your formal cooperation. Signed, documented, on the record." "Yes," Sophia said. Not after a pause, not after visible deliberation. Just yes, flat and immediate, the way she had said no to Damian Cross in the cafe and meant it both times with the same quality of finality. Mendez looked at her for a moment with something that might, in different circumstances, have been respect. "Okay, I'll have my department's cooperation agreement to you by end of day. Don't sign anything from Cross's people between now and then. Don't respond to the board directly. Route everything through your attorney." She picked up her recorder. "Mr. Walker." She turned it off before she said the next part. "Unofficially, if anything develops that requires a faster response than the formal process can provide, contact Dom Reyes. He'll reach me." Ryan nodded. They got out of the car in the cold parking lot, and Sophia and Okafor walked to their sedan and Ryan stood by his truck and watched them go. Mendez came and stood beside him for a moment. "The Holt connection," she said quietly. "That goes somewhere I can't follow from my position. I want you to know that I'm aware of it and I'm not ignoring it. But there are lanes here, and mine has limits." "I know." Do you have people who can work the other lane? He thought about Dom, about the particular weight of Dom's pause when he'd first heard Varno's name, about what Dom had said about the investigation that had been shelved, and the two investigators reassigned. I'm working on it, Ryan said. He drove to pick up Emma from a playdate at Lily's house, where he was 40 minutes early because Lily's birthday party had ended at noon and he had forgotten. Lily's mother, a warm, disorganized woman named Patricia, who had flour on her shirt and the specific exhausted cheerfulness of someone who had just hosted 11 eight-year-olds for 3 hours, invited him in and gave him coffee and told him Emma had eaten 2 pieces of cake and 1 musical chairs, which Emma confirmed with visible satisfaction. He sat in Patricia's kitchen and drank bad coffee and listened to Emma describe the party with a completeness of detail that suggested she had enjoyed it in a total and uncomplicated way. And he sat in that uncomplicated enjoyment with her for the 20 minutes before they left. And he did not check his phone once. The weekend passed with the particular quality of time that moves normally on the surface while something underneath is building pressure. Ryan serviced a Toyota on Saturday afternoon and helped Marcus with a fleet van inspection on Sunday morning, and Sunday evening he sat at the kitchen table after Emma was in bed and went through everything he had. The copies of Sophia's documents, his notes from the conversation with Dom, the timeline he had built across the week, and tried to find the thing he was missing. He found it at 11:15 p.m. when he was tired enough that his mind had stopped arguing with what it was seeing. The Chew emails had been sent from a Novasec internal address to an external vendor email. Standard enough on the surface, but the external address, the receiving end, when Ryan ran it through a search Dom had access to, resolved to a server in Vancouver, registered to a subsidiary that was 2 layers removed from the same Delaware shell company that had received Cross's structured payments. 2 layers, not 1. The kind of distance that was designed to survive a first-pass audit, but not a thorough one. Chew wasn't just a leak. He was a node, an active participant in the architecture, not a passive informant. He had been routing proprietary technical files outward for, based on the email timestamps, at least 19 months. 19 months. Which meant the operation had been building inside Novasec long before Cross made any public move toward acquisition. The acquisition wasn't the beginning of this. It was the final step. The access had already been partially established. Cross was trying to formalize what Slade and Chew and the Vancouver infrastructure had already quietly built. Ryan sent the analysis to Dom at 11:47 p.m. with a note that said, "Pass to Mendez. The platform isn't just the target, it's already partially compromised." Dom replied 4 minutes later, which meant Dom was also awake at midnight going through things. On it. Stay available. Ryan was available. That was not the question. Monday arrived with the specific hostility of a week that had already made up its mind. By 8 a.m., Ryan had received a certified letter from a law firm he had never heard of, delivered apparently over the weekend, informing him that Damian Cross intended to pursue civil action for assault and battery arising from the incident at Meridian Coffee. Attached was a copy of the security footage still, the same grainy image that had been in the news, the one that stripped all context and showed only a man in mid-movement against another man. The letter was professionally composed and carried the particular confidence of people who had done this before and expected it to work. Ryan called his own attorney, a man named Pete Salinger, who handled his business contracts and who Ryan had never needed for anything adversarial, and read him the letter over the phone. Pete was quiet for a moment. "Do you have the actual security footage from the cafe? The full, unedited version?" "Not in my possession, but the FBI agent who's running the Cross investigation has requested it through the formal evidence process." Another pause from Pete, longer. "You're involved in an FBI investigation." "Tangentially." "Ryan, I need you to define tangentially." "I provided supporting documentation that connected to an existing inquiry. I'm cooperating as an informal source." "Okay?" Pete exhaled slowly. "I'm going to need to refer you to someone with litigation experience. But here's the short version. The civil suit is harassment. It's designed to drain your resources and attention and pressure you into silence. If the FBI's investigation moves forward, it becomes significantly harder to pursue. The best thing you can do is document everything you experienced and let the federal process do what it's supposed to do." A pause. "Is the cafe's security system operated by the cafe itself or by a management company?" I don't know. Find out today. If it's independently operated and the raw footage still exists somewhere outside of what Cross's people have already accessed, you want to get to that independently. Ryan found out by 11 a.m. because he walked to Meridian Coffee and asked the owner directly. Her name was Carrie Holt. No relation, just a coincidence Ryan had to set aside. And she was in her mid-40s and ran the cafe with her husband. And when Ryan introduced himself, she looked at him with an expression that had several things in it, none of them simple. "I know who you are," she said. They were standing in the back near the storage room, away from the morning customers. "I've been thinking about calling you, actually." "The footage," Ryan said. "Yes." She glanced toward the front of the cafe, then back at him. "The people who came, Cross's people, I assume, I don't know their names. They came Monday afternoon. They spoke to my husband. They told him they needed a copy of the security footage from Tuesday morning for legal purposes. He gave them access to the system." She paused. "What they didn't know, and I didn't correct them, is that our system automatically uploads to a cloud backup. The backup operates on a 6-hour delay. The cloud copy they never asked about and we never mentioned." Ryan looked at her. "I've had it backed up separately since Monday night," she said. 3 copies. One with my sister in Spokane, one with my attorney, one in a place I'm not going to tell you about right now." She said it without drama, practically, the way people said things they had prepared carefully and decided to say. "I watched what happened in my cafe. I watched that man come in and degrade a woman in front of my customers and put his hands on her things and threaten her. And then I watched a man in the corner stand up when nobody else would." She met his eyes. "I'm not interested in having my cafe become the place where the wrong story got told because I didn't do anything." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "I need to connect you with an FBI agent named Carla Mendez," he said. "Today, if possible. Tell me when and where." By Monday afternoon, Mendez had the cloud backup. By Monday evening, she had her authorization for the full investigation. She texted Ryan 2 words at 7:43 p.m. "We're open." Tuesday morning, Dom called. Ryan was in the garage under a Subaru with a failing exhaust when his phone buzzed in his shirt pocket. He rolled out from under the car and sat up on the creeper and answered it. "The Holt angle has traction," Dom said, and his voice was back to its operational register. Compact, specific, no performance. "I connected with someone I trust in the defense intelligence community. The task force that was shelved in 2022, the 2 investigators who were reassigned, one of them is now in private consulting. He's been waiting for someone to open a door." A pause. "He has names, Ryan. Not just Holt. A network that runs through 3 private equity structures and 2 foreign nationals who have been routing extracted data through financial instruments that look like commodity trading. He couldn't take it anywhere through official channels because every door he tried had someone behind it connected to the network." "He'll talk to Mendez?" "He'll talk to the right person in the right structure. Mendez may not be the right lane for the national security component. That needs a different authority. But if she can open a joint task force with appropriate counterintelligence participation, he'll come in." A pause. "This is getting big, Walker. I want you to know I'm not using that word loosely." "I know." Ryan sat on the creeper in the middle of the garage floor with the Subaru above him and Marcus's radio playing something he still wasn't listening to. "What's the timeline pressure?" "Cross has a meeting scheduled for Thursday. Private. Not the board session. Something else. My source got wind of it through channels I can't explain over the phone. It appears to be a final stage meeting with Varnow." Dom paused. "If that meeting happens and whatever agreement they're finalizing gets executed, the access architecture becomes complicated to unravel, even with everything Mendez has." Ryan looked at the calendar on the wall of the garage. "Thursday, 4 days. Does Mendez know about this meeting?" "She will in about 2 hours." He called Sophia after he hung up with Dom. She picked up on the first ring. She had been doing that all week, the way people picked up when they were managing too many variables, and the phone was one of the few things they could control. "There's a meeting Thursday," he said. "Cross and Varno. We don't have the location yet. How are your internal channels? Is there anyone still inside the company who has contact with Cross's side?" A pause while she thought. "Warren Chu is on administrative leave, but he's not been formally terminated. His building access is restricted, but his system access is on a delayed revocation. IT was supposed to complete it last Friday, and I found out this morning they haven't finished the process. He can still read certain internal communications." Would he be in contact with Cross's team? If Cross is expecting something from inside Novasec before Thursday, yes, almost certainly. She paused. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that a man who's been running an internal operation for 19 months and is now on administrative leave for reasons that suggest he knows he's been found out. That man is anxious right now. Anxious people make contact with the people they're afraid of disappointing. That contact might be traceable. You want me to let it keep the revocation incomplete? I want you to talk to Mendez about it first. This is her process now. But yes. He heard her exhale. Okay. A pause. Ryan, how are you doing with all of this? The question landed differently than he expected. People asked it as a greeting, as a formality, as the linguistic filler between subjects that actually mattered. The way she asked it had a specificity that meant she was actually asking. I'm fine, he said, which was the answer he always gave and was approximately half true. Emma's okay? She went back to regular recess yesterday. She's fine. Good. A pause. I want you to know that whatever happens Thursday, whatever this resolves into, I understand the cost of what you've done here. The civil suit, the business pressure, the media coverage. You came back for a phone and ended up here. That's not something I'm going to forget. He didn't know what to say to that exactly, so he said, let's get to Friday first. Wednesday came with movement on multiple fronts simultaneously, which was the nature of things when an operation, he had started thinking of it that way, against his better judgment, because it was the frame that fit, reached a certain threshold of momentum. Mendez confirmed the joint authorization by midday, an FBI financial crimes investigation running in parallel with a counterintelligence component that operated through a separate authority and that she described, when she called Ryan, in deliberately vague terms that he understood to mean there were people now involved whose participation couldn't be openly acknowledged. The former task force investigator, Dom's contact, had come in. She didn't say his name. Warren Chu had, as Ryan had predicted, made contact. Monitoring his system access had shown a series of outbound queries on Wednesday morning. Not emails, which he was apparently cautious enough to avoid, but document access patterns that were traceable to specific files. Files that would be meaningful only to someone who needed to know the current state of Novasec's access architecture before Thursday's meeting. Mendez and her team read those patterns as confirmation. She was conducting a final assessment to pass to Varno's people. The location of Thursday's meeting arrived Wednesday evening through Dom's network, a private event space in the Cascade Tower, a luxury high-rise office building in downtown Seattle. 43rd floor. The booking was under a name connected to one of Cross's holding companies, made 3 weeks earlier, which meant this meeting had been planned long before the cafe incident, long before any of the current pressure had been applied. It was a scheduled step in a process that had been running for 19 months, and Tuesday at Meridian Coffee had been an inconvenient obstacle to it, nothing more. Cross had intended this from the beginning. Ryan sat with that for a while Wednesday night. He had a conversation with Mendez about Thursday at 9 p.m. She was direct about what the federal process could and couldn't do with 48 hours of preparation. She had enough for financial warrants. She had enough for the Slade connection. She needed the meeting to happen. She needed Cross and Varno in the same room executing the agreement before she could move on the higher value targets rather than just the infrastructure, which meant controlled observation of the meeting followed by intervention at the moment of execution. What about Sophia? Ryan asked. If Cross still intends to push the acquisition through, he may try to use Thursday's meeting to create leverage, proof of a done deal that pressures the board regardless of what the legal process does. I know, Mendez said, which is why I need her out of contact and in a secure location before Thursday morning. I've arranged that. She's cooperating. And the building? We have the floor plan. The event space has 2 access points and a connecting service corridor. My team will be in position by 8 a.m. The meeting is scheduled for 10. She paused. Mr. Walker, I need you to be very clear with me about your role tomorrow. Support, external, not inside. Correct, not inside. Her voice was firm on that. If anything develops that requires a different calculation, Dom Reyes is your contact. But the federal process handles the building. That's non-negotiable. Understood, Ryan said. He meant it. He had been honest with himself about the limits of his position since the beginning. He was a mechanic with a skill set and a set of connections and a reason to care, and the people with the authority and the structure were doing their jobs. His value had been in the connecting, the bridging, the identification of the pieces that the official process hadn't yet reached. Not in the execution. He told himself that on Wednesday night, and he still believed it on Thursday morning when he dropped Emma at school, kissed the top of her head while she tolerated it with the practiced resignation of an 8-year-old, and watched her walk through the school entrance with her backpack and her horse that wasn't quite a horse lunchbox. He drove downtown and parked 3 blocks from the Cascade Tower at 8:45 a.m. Dom was already there, sitting in a rental car Ryan didn't recognize, eating something out of a paper bag with the unhurried quality of a man who had done a great deal of waiting in vehicles over the course of his life and had made his peace with it. Ryan got into the passenger seat and Dom handed him a coffee without comment. "Mendez's team is in position," Dom said. 4 agents on the 43rd floor posing as event setup, 2 in the lobby, 2 on the service corridor. He paused. "The former task force investigator, the one I can't name, is with a different team in a different location that I also can't tell you about. That team is handling the Holt component, which is running parallel and will close parallel. Different clock, same day." Ryan drank the coffee. It was from a drive-through somewhere, and it wasn't as good as Meridian's, but it was hot. "Varno?" he asked. "Arrived in Seattle yesterday evening. He's in the building." Dom glanced at him. "Cross's legal team filed a motion in civil court this morning to expedite the assault case. It's a pressure play. Make noise on your end while the main event runs on his end. His lawyer knows something is moving against them. They're accelerating. Pete Salinger knows? He will when his office opens." Dom crumpled the paper bag and put it in the back seat. "Walker, if something goes sideways in that building, and I'm not saying it will, there's a maintenance entrance on the north side of the building, first basement level. I have a key card, and I know the service corridor route to 43. Ryan looked at him. "I'm not saying it will," Dom repeated. "I'm saying I know the way." At 9:47, Mendez texted Dom's phone. "Cross is in the building. Varnow confirmed on 43. We're at Green." Ryan sat in the passenger seat of a rental car 3 blocks away and drank bad coffee and did the thing that was hardest for him. Not the preparedness, not the calculation, not even the restraint, the waiting. The specific discipline of trusting a process he wasn't running, with people he hadn't trained with, in a building he couldn't see into, while the pieces of something that had started in a cafe with a cup of black coffee and a woman sitting alone moved toward their resolution without him. It lasted 19 minutes. Then Dom's phone buzzed, and Dom looked at it, and Ryan watched Dom's face, which was useful data because Dom had learned to control most expressions, but not the one that appeared now. A brief, involuntary settling of tension, the face of a man who has been holding something and just put it down. "They're in custody," Dom said. "Cross, Varnow, and 2 others. Mendez has the executed agreement. They signed it right there in the room, which she says is exactly what she needed." He looked at Ryan. "The other team closed Holt simultaneously. DOD involvement confirmed. Warrant executed." He set the phone down. "It's done." Ryan looked at the Cascade Tower through the windshield, 43 floors up, behind glass and distance. A thing had ended that had started long before he ever walked into a cafe and ordered a black coffee and sat in a corner because the booth had a view of both exits. He thought about the transmission job he had waiting at the garage. He thought about Emma's lunchbox and the birthday party and the book she had fallen asleep reading. He thought about Carrie Holt with 3 copies of the Cloud backup and Sophia Bennett saying the word yes without hesitation when it had cost her something significant to say it. He finished his coffee. "I have a Subaru with an exhaust problem waiting," he said. Dom looked at him. Then he laughed. The real version, not the performance. The sound of something that had been held carefully for days releasing all at once. "Of course you do," he said. "Of course you do." Ryan got out of the car and walked 3 blocks to his truck and drove back to the garage through the gray Seattle morning, and when he got there, Marcus was already inside with the radio going, and the first car of the day pulled into the bay, and Ryan put on his coveralls and went to work, and the ordinary world received him back without comment, which was exactly how he preferred it. The Subaru's exhaust took most of Thursday afternoon to sort out properly, which was fine. Ryan needed the work the way he sometimes needed it. Not for distraction exactly, but for the grounding effect of it. The way physical problem-solving pulled the mind down from altitude and put it somewhere it could actually stand. Marcus asked no questions, which was one of the things Ryan valued most about him. Marcus operated on a principle of professional non-interference that Ryan had never explicitly requested and had always appreciated. By 4 o'clock, the car was done, the owner picked it up, and Ryan sat in the office with the door open and the radio going and his phone on the desk. And he waited to feel something definitive about the day. It didn't come. That was the reality of it. The ending of something that had run at high intensity didn't arrive with the emotional resolution that the intensity seemed to promise. It arrived like this: a quiet garage, a finished job, a phone on a desk. Mendez called at 4:22. "I wanted to give you the full picture before it hits the news cycle," she said. Her voice had the particular flatness of someone who had been operating at maximum function for 48 hours and was now running on the far side of that. Cross is in federal custody. Varnow is being processed separately. There are jurisdictional components there that I can't speak to in detail, but he's not walking away from this. Warren Chu turned over a full cooperation agreement this afternoon in exchange for reduced charges. He confirmed 19 months of deliberate data routing. His testimony alone would have been enough, but combined with what we have from the financial records and the executed agreement from this morning, she paused. It's substantial, Mr. Walker, the kind of case that doesn't get walked back. And Holt? A longer pause. That's outside my lane, as I told you. What I can say is that the parallel action closed as planned and the relevant authority is handling it. I won't have anything further to share on that, publicly or otherwise. She let that sit for a moment. The civil suit against you. Cross's attorneys filed a motion to withdraw it this afternoon. I suspect they made that calculation before their client finished being processed. Ryan looked at the bulletin board on the office wall. Emma's 5-legged dog, the invoices, a phone number he'd written in marker 3 years ago for a parts supplier who had since gone out of business, that he'd never erased. The cafe footage, he said, will be entered into the public record of the case. The full unedited version from Carrie Holt's cloud backup. It's already been reviewed by the prosecutorial team. Mendez paused. You're not the aggressor in that footage, Mr. Walker. Anyone who watches it will see that clearly. I expect the news outlets that ran the original story will have some correcting to do in the coming days. They don't have to. No, she said. They don't. But they will, because the arrest of Damian Cross is going to be the story, and the footage is part of the story, and the full context will come out. A pause. Is there anything else you need from me right now? He thought about it. No. Thank you, Agent Mendez. Thank you, she said, and the way she said it was specific and without decoration, the way people said things they meant without needing to amplify them. He hung up and sat in the office for another few minutes, and then he went to pick up Emma. She came out of school at the front entrance with her backpack hanging off one shoulder and her lunchbox in her hand, and she was talking to a girl Ryan didn't recognize. And when she saw him, she wrapped up the conversation and jogged over with the particular efficiency of a child who has decided to be quick but still wants it known that she was doing something important beforehand. Cameron apologized, she announced, climbing into the truck. Ryan backed out of the pickup lane. About what? The computer. He said it was actually his turn, but he felt bad. She seemed to weigh this. I told him it was okay. That was good of you. I know. She set her lunchbox on her lap. Also, I finished my book. The horse one? It's not called The Horse One, Dad. It's called Misty of Shincoteague. Right, was it good? It was amazing. She said it with the completeness of someone reviewing something they have decided deserves a single, total word. Can we get noodle soup? He took her for noodle soup. They sat across from each other at a small Vietnamese place 3 blocks from the garage that had been there since before Ryan moved to the neighborhood, and that Emma referred to as their noodle place with a proprietorial ease that he found quietly wonderful. She ate with considerable focus and told him about the book in detail. The horses, the storm, the girl who wanted something and worked for it and got it. And Ryan listened and asked questions at the right moments and let the evening be what it was, which was the best thing it had been all week. He did not tell her what had happened that day. There would be a version of the story she would hear eventually. The news would carry it, kids at school would mention it, and Emma, who was sharp and connected things, would put pieces together. When that happened, he would answer her questions honestly, in the proportions appropriate to an 8-year-old, And they would talk about it the way they talked about hard things, directly, without excessive cushioning, with room for her to feel whatever she felt without being managed. But tonight was soup and a horse book, and Cameron's apology, and Ryan had learned, slowly and imperfectly over the last 3 years, that the ability to let a good evening be a good evening was not a small thing. It was, in its way, the whole point. The news ran the story Friday morning. Ryan was in the garage before it went wide, but Marcus showed up at 8 with his phone already out and held it up with an expression that was mostly baffled and partly impressed and said, "Is this you?" Ryan looked at the screen. The headline read, "Seattle Tech CEO's attempted hostile takeover ends in federal arrest. Cafe incident at center of unraveling criminal network." Below it was a photograph of the Cascade Tower, and below that, as a sidebar, was the full security footage from Meridian Coffee, clearly labeled as the complete unedited recording. "We've got a Camry coming in at 9, Ryan said. Marcus looked at him. Then he put his phone in his pocket. "Yep," he said, and went to open the bay doors. The phone calls that day were significant. Ryan let most of them go to voicemail. 2 of the fleet accounts that had canceled, the landscaping company and the delivery service, called back and left messages that were professionally phrased and slightly awkward in the way that messages are awkward when the person leaving them knows they owe an explanation they aren't quite giving. Ryan called both of them back, and both conversations were brief and practical, and both accounts were reinstated by end of day. He didn't make it a moment. It was just business returning to what it had been before someone had interfered with it, which was a restoration of something ordinary rather than the arrival of something extraordinary, and that was the right way to receive it. Pete Salinger called at noon to confirm the civil suit had been formally withdrawn. Dom texted at 2 p.m. "Buy you a beer sometime this decade." Ryan replied, "Yeah." The harder calls were the ones from journalists. 3 different outlets, 2 local and 1 national, wanted Ryan Walker's account of his involvement in what was now being described as a significant federal case with national security dimensions. He declined all 3. He wrote no statements. He had nothing to say to cameras or recorders that he hadn't already said to the people who actually needed to hear it. And his experience with the way public narratives worked, the way the cafe footage had been cut and distributed in a form that meant something different from the truth, had not made him more interested in the process of public narrative. Carrie Holt called on Friday evening, and that call he answered. "The news covered the cafe," she said. "Did you see it?" "I saw." "They mentioned the cloud backup. They mentioned my name." She paused. "I've had 14 people come in today who said they saw the story, 14 new customers." Another pause, and he could hear something in her voice that she was being careful with, a warmth she was controlling slightly. "I wanted you to know." "Good," Ryan said. "You did the right thing." "I want you to know I would have done it regardless." "I know," he said. That was clear. He meant it. The thing about Carrie Holt was that she had made 3 copies before she knew how any of it would resolve. Not as a bet on an outcome, but because it was the right thing and she had decided to do it and then she had done it. That was rarer than it sounded. Most people, when pressed, found reasons why the moment wasn't quite right, or the stakes were too personal, or the right move was to wait and see. Carrie Holt had looked at what had happened in her cafe and decided that her cafe was not going to be the place where the wrong story got told. Ryan understood that kind of decision. Understood it the way you understand things. You have also, at some point, been faced with. Sophia called Saturday morning. He had expected her to call before this. She had his number. She had been in contact throughout the week, but she hadn't, and when he thought about why, he understood it. She had spent the week in a secure location cooperating with federal investigators, going through everything she had built and then watched be threatened. And when something like that ends, there is a period that isn't quite relief and isn't quite grief, and is hard to make into words that would make sense to someone who hadn't been inside it. He had given her the time without thinking about it consciously, which meant he had understood it at some level that operated below deliberation. "I'm back in the office," she said when he picked up. Her voice was different, lighter in a technical sense, less load-bearing, but not without a tiredness underneath it that was probably going to take a while to clear. "How's the board?" She made a sound that was almost a laugh. 4 of them called me this week to express their full confidence in my leadership. The 2 who had been most vocal about accepting Cross's terms Both cited scheduling conflicts that prevented them from taking the call. She paused. I'm going to let that sit for a while before I decide what to do about it. That's smart. I know. A pause. The company is fine. Novasec is fine. The federal investigation creates a complicated period for the contracts. There are protocols when a company's infrastructure has been identified as having been potentially compromised, audits and remediation steps. But we knew that going in, and my technical team has been preparing for it. Warren Chu's replacement is already identified. We'll get through it. You will, Ryan said. I know. Another pause. Ryan, can I ask you something? Go ahead. The whole time, when you were looking at the documents, talking to Mendez, working with Dom, were you scared? He considered it. Not the performance of considering it, but the actual work of locating an honest answer in the region of the question. Not the way you mean, he said. There was a night early on where I thought about what could happen to Emma if I handled something wrong. That was close to scared. He paused. Mostly it was operational. My mind went into a mode it knows. That's not courage, it's just a setting. That's an interesting way to describe it. It's the accurate way. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about something I want to offer you, she said. And I want to say it straightforwardly, not as a speech, just as what it is. Novasec needs a chief security advisor, not a consultant, not an outside contractor, someone with a seat at the table who understands threat assessment and operational security from a perspective that purely technical people don't have. The salary is significant. The role is flexible enough that it doesn't require a full-time office presence. A pause. You can keep the garage. Ryan stood in his kitchen on a Saturday morning with the radio going low and the smell of coffee and the particular quiet that Emma asleep upstairs produced, which was different from Emma at school quiet in a way he couldn't have explained but felt distinctly. I appreciate the offer, he said. I know you do. You don't have to answer today. I know. He looked at the refrigerator door, the horse drawings, the five-legged dog, a spelling test from 2 months ago with a sticker on it that Emma had placed there herself because she found the sticker funny. Can I ask you something back? Yes. Why me specifically? You could find someone with more current credentials, someone who's been operating in a corporate security context for the last 5 years, not fixing transmissions. She was quiet for a moment, and he could tell she was doing the same thing he had just done, not reaching for an easy answer, actually looking for the right one. Because I watched you sit in a corner booth and do nothing dramatic while a powerful man destroyed my things and threatened me in front of a room full of people, she said. And then I watched you stand up. Not because you were angry. You weren't, that was the thing. Not because I was attractive or helpless or because there was something in it for you. You stood up because the math worked out to standing up, and you did the math without flinching. A pause. I've met a lot of people with credentials. I've met very few people who do the math that clearly and then act on it. Ryan looked at the refrigerator for a long moment. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. He took Emma to the park that afternoon because the weather had shifted in the specific way November sometimes shifted in Seattle. Not warm, not dramatic, just a pause in the rain and a pale light that made the city look briefly like a different city, one that had been there all along underneath the gray and was just surfacing. Emma wore her yellow jacket and ran ahead of him on the path the way she always did, then circled back, then ran ahead again, the particular pattern of a child who wanted both freedom and proximity and had found the exact movement that provided both. He pushed her on the swings for a while. She had recently decided she was too old to be pushed on swings, but still allowed it under the guise of going faster than she could manage herself, which was a face-saving construction he found entirely reasonable and played along with without comment. Dad, she said, swinging. Yeah. Keisha said her mom said you're famous now. I'm not famous. She said you were on the news. Being on the news once doesn't make you famous. She considered this with the swing going back and forth. Were you scared? He looked at her. 8 years old, yellow jacket, the specific earnestness of a child asking a question she had been sitting with for a while. No, he said. Were you? She thought about it. A little. When you said there was a situation, she paused. But then you said you were handling it. And? And I believed you. She said it simply. Not as a compliment, just as a fact. The way she stated facts she was certain of. So I wasn't that scared. He kept pushing the swing and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say that would have been better than what she had just said and the silence around it. That was the thing about this. The thing he had tried to understand for 3 years and hadn't had the language for until recently, gradually, in pieces. People talked about courage as if it were a quality that lived inside a person, something generated internally and deployed outward. And maybe that was partly true. But what he had come to understand in the particular way that people understood things they had learned through loss rather than instruction was that courage was also relational. It existed in the space between people. It moved. When Carrie Holt made 3 copies of a backup because she had seen something wrong and decided not to let it stand, that moved something. When Sophia Bennett said yes without hesitation, when yes was costly, that moved something. Even Emma, sitting in a park on a Saturday afternoon and saying, "I believed you." That moved something backward through the week and changed the quality of what had been hard about it. He wasn't a hero. He was clear about that in a way that wasn't false modesty. It was just accurate. He had gone into a cafe for coffee and come out of a situation that had found him, and he had done what his training and his judgment told him to do. Imperfectly and anxiously, and with a locked case, he'd moved to the bedroom floor and then moved back to the closet shelf on Friday morning when the need for it had passed. He had missed things. He had been uncertain. He had laid awake looking at a ceiling and not known how Thursday would go, and the uncertainty had not been clean or cinematic. It had been the ordinary, uncomfortable uncertainty of a person in a situation too large to fully see. The difference, maybe, if there was one, was only that he hadn't let the uncertainty be the deciding factor. He called Dom that evening. "Beer," Ryan said when Dom answered. "When?" "Tuesday. After 6. "I'll be there." A pause. "You doing okay?" "I'm okay." He looked out the kitchen window at the street below, dark and wet again, Seattle having resumed its default. "Emma's good." "That's what matters," Dom said, and he meant it, because Dom had a daughter of his own, 13 and already taller than him, and this was the frequency on which Dom and Ryan had always, underneath everything else, actually communicated. 3 weeks later, Damian Cross and 2 co-conspirators were formally indicted on 14 counts, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, unauthorized access to protected computer systems, and conspiracy against federal procurement regulations. Elias Varno was indicted separately on 3 counts, with 2 additional charges filed in cooperation with a European jurisdiction whose involvement the Department of Justice acknowledged without elaborating. Francis Holt, the retired admiral, resigned from 2 private board positions the day before his own set of charges was filed, an attempt at preemptive dignification that satisfied nobody and reduced nothing. The Novasec platform underwent a 60-day federal security audit, after which it was certified clean of the access architecture Warren Chu had been quietly constructing. 3 federal agencies renewed their contracts. 2 new state government networks came on as clients in the 6 months that followed, citing Novasec's handling of the crisis as evidence of institutional integrity, which Sophia found both gratifying and slightly absurd, in the way that institutions rewarding near misses as if they were achievements was always slightly absurd. Warren Chu pled guilty and received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation, which was comprehensive and damaging and helped close 3 other cases the FBI had been working in parallel. He served 2 years. Ryan didn't follow his case closely. He didn't feel much about it one way or another, which he thought was probably the healthiest response available. The civil suit against Ryan was formally withdrawn and never refiled. The news outlets that had run the original framing ran corrections that were less prominent than the original stories, which was the way of things. The customers who had left his garage over the coverage came back by degrees, some quickly, some slowly, one apologetically, most without comment, as if the gap had not occurred. He received 11 pieces of mail from strangers who had seen the unedited cafe footage and wanted to express something. He read each one once and did not respond and did not keep them. Not because they weren't kind, but because keeping them would have made the thing they referred to into something it wasn't. He accepted Sophia's offer in December. He did it at Meridian Coffee, which was Sophia's choice of meeting place. A callback, he assumed, to where it started, which had the quality of something intentional and slightly theatrical that he would not have chosen, but that he found, sitting there with 2 cups of coffee and the cafe going on around them in its ordinary Tuesday way. To be not wrong. Part-time, he said. 2 days a week in person, remote availability outside that. The garage stays primary. I know, she said. Those are the terms I'm offering. He looked at the table where she had sat that morning. Different table, same cafe, the booth with the good view of the door now occupied by a young man with headphones, and thought about the version of himself that had walked in here 6 weeks ago for coffee and a quiet hour before school pickup. That person had built a life on the premise that quiet was the thing worth protecting, that the borders of his world, the garage, the apartment, the school pickup, the Tuesday booth, were the terms of a deal he had made with himself after the years that had broken something in him, and that the deal was fair, and that living inside those borders was not small. He still believed that. The life he had made was not small. It had Emma in it. That made it larger than most things he could name. But he had also learned, in the specific and unglamorous way that experience taught things, that the borders could be maintained without being treated as walls, that the deal he had made with himself had room in it for one more thing, if the thing was worth coming home from. Okay, he said. Sophia picked up her coffee cup. To whatever this is, she said. He picked up his. To whatever this is. They drank their coffee in the ordinary morning of a cafe where 6 weeks ago something had happened that had cost both of them something and given both of them something and had not resolved into a clean lesson because the things that matter rarely do. What it had resolved into was this. 2 people on a Tuesday morning with coffee that was still better than the drive-thru, in a city that was gray and wet and going about its business, in a life that was imperfect and ongoing, and for the moment, enough. Ryan's phone buzzed on the table. He turned it over. A text from Emma's teacher. Emma has a note for you. She says it's important. He smiled before he could stop himself. I have to pick something up from the school, he said, standing. Sophia looked at him with an expression he had come to recognize. Amused, a little surprised, the look of someone encountering a set of priorities she respected but had not previously arranged her thinking around. Go, she said. He went. The note was folded into quarters and sealed with a sticker of a cartoon sun. He opened it in the school hallway while Emma's teacher watched with the expression of someone who already knew what was inside. Dad, I drew you something. I think you will like it. It is a horse, but this time I counted the legs first. Love, Emma. He folded it back up and put it in his jacket pocket. He drove back to the garage through the Seattle drizzle, and he put the note on the bulletin board between the 5-legged dog and the out-of-date phone number, and he went back to work.